Something quietly shifted in the housing conversation in 2026, and most people have not noticed it yet. The people who are building Earthships right now are not the same people who were building them 20 years ago. They are not barefoot idealists living off the grid in New Mexico. They are software engineers from Denver. They are nurses from Atlanta. They are retired teachers from Ohio. They are 32-year-old couples who looked at a $300,000 mortgage, a $400 monthly electric bill, and a water bill that went up again this year, and decided that the conventional path was simply not acceptable anymore. Something changed in 2026 that made a building system that was once considered fringe suddenly look like the most rational financial decision available to a specific and rapidly growing group of people. And that something is not one thing. It is 5 simultaneous forces hitting at exactly the same moment and pointing every serious alternative housing researcher toward the same conclusion. I have tracked every one of those forces. I have talked to builders, studied the numbers, and mapped what is actually driving this resurgence. And what I found is far more interesting and far more grounded in hard economic reality than the usual Earthship content you see online. Stay with me until the very end because the final section of this video contains the single reason that I believe the Earthship revival of 2026 is not a trend. It is the beginning of something that will look obvious in 10 years and that almost nobody is talking about clearly right now. If you want current, honest, and genuinely useful content about alternative housing and the real economics of building differently in 2026, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell because this channel covers the space with more depth and honesty than anywhere else on this platform. Every video I make is built around what is actually true rather than what is easy to say. Now let us get into the 5 forces driving the Earthship revival. Force 1. The mortgage math broke down completely. The first force is the one that hits people hardest and most personally. The conventional housing math, the path that every financial advisor, every parent, and every real estate agent told you was the responsible adult choice, has broken down to a degree that is genuinely historic in 2026. The median home price in the United States crossed $420,000 earlier this year in most metropolitan markets. At current 30-year fixed mortgage rates, a buyer putting 20% down on a $420,000 home carries a monthly payment that exceeds $2,200 before property taxes, homeowners insurance, and utilities. For a household earning the median American income, that single housing payment now represents more than 40% of take-home pay. Financial advisors have historically defined housing stress as any situation where housing costs exceed 30% of income. In 2026, that threshold is being exceeded by tens of millions of households simultaneously. This is not a temporary disruption. This is a structural failure of the conventional housing model. An Earthship on rural land purchased in a favorable jurisdiction does not have a mortgage payment if it is owner-built. It does not have a utility bill if it is properly designed. It does not have a water bill. It does not have a heating bill or a cooling bill. The ongoing cost of living in a well-built Earthship is essentially the cost of property taxes on land that costs $20,000 instead of property taxes on a $400,000 home. For the household that has done this math, and in 2026 more households are doing it than at any previous point in the Earthship movement's 50-year history, the conclusion is inescapable. The Earthship is not a lifestyle choice for people who want to opt out of society. In 2026, it is the rational financial response of people who ran the numbers and found that the conventional path was going to extract a staggering amount of money from them for the rest of their professional lives. That realization is force 1, and it is growing stronger every year that mortgage rates stay elevated and home prices stay high. Force 2. Energy costs changed the calculation permanently. The second force compounds the first one in a way that makes the combined pressure almost impossible for a serious financial thinker to ignore. Energy costs in 2026 are not what they were in 2019. They are dramatically higher, they are volatile, and there is no credible mechanism for them to return to their pre-pandemic levels. The average American household electric bill has increased by approximately 30% since 2020. In states with significant grid infrastructure stress, parts of California, Texas, and the Southeast, the increases have been far more severe. Propane prices for rural heating remain elevated and volatile. Natural gas, which heats approximately half of American homes, has seen significant price volatility that has made household budget planning genuinely difficult for millions of families. The Earthship was designed in the 1970s during the first major energy crisis, and it was designed specifically to solve the problem of energy dependence in residential buildings. A properly designed Earthship in an appropriate climate has zero heating bill, zero cooling bill, and zero electrical bill for the home's operational life. The solar system that provides electricity was a one-time purchase. The passive solar thermal mass system that provides heating and cooling is a physical property of the building itself, and it costs nothing to operate. Every year that energy prices increase, the financial advantage of an Earthship over a conventional home grows larger. In 2026, that advantage is compounding in real time. A builder who completes an Earthship this year locks in zero energy costs for the next 30 to 50 years, while their neighbors in conventional homes face utility bills that are almost certain to continue climbing. That asymmetry is Force 2, and it is getting more powerful every year. Force 3. Solar and battery technology crossed a price threshold. The third force is the one that makes the Earthship more accessible in 2026 than at any previous point in its history. The technology that was always the most expensive component of an off-grid Earthship, the solar panels and battery storage system, has undergone a decade of price decline that crossed a threshold in 2026 where it is no longer a significant barrier for most owner-builders. Solar panels in 2026 cost between 15 and 25 cents per watt for commercial-grade monocrystalline panels at commercial quantities. In 2015, the same quality panel cost 60 to 70 cents per watt. That is more than a 60% price reduction in a single decade. The lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry that powers the most reliable off-grid storage systems cost over $500 per kilowatt-hour of usable capacity in 2015. In 2026, the equivalent storage costs approximately $150 to $200 per kilowatt-hour. What this means practically for an Earthship builder in 2026 is that the complete off-grid solar and storage system that would have cost $25,000 to $40,000 on top of the build budget 10 years ago now costs $8,000 to $15,000 for equivalent or superior performance. After applying the federal residential clean energy tax credit of 30%, the net cost drops to $5,600 to $10,500. For a build that is already achieving thermal self-sufficiency through passive solar design and water self-sufficiency through rainwater harvesting, this affordable solar system completes the off-grid picture for a fraction of what it would have cost even recently. The technology price decline is ongoing. It shows no credible sign of reversing. Builders who have been watching and waiting for solar to become affordable have hit the moment. That is Force 3. Force 4. The knowledge infrastructure is now global. The fourth force is subtler than the others, but it is arguably the most important one for understanding why the Earthship revival is happening now rather than at some earlier point in the past decade. The knowledge required to build an Earthship successfully, which was once concentrated in a specific geographic location and available only through expensive workshops or in-person apprenticeship, is now freely and globally available to anyone with an internet connection. In 2026, there are thousands of documented Earthship builds published in extraordinary granular detail across YouTube channels, builder blogs, community forums, Instagram accounts, and Facebook groups. First-time builders in Scotland, South Africa, New Zealand, and Mexico are documenting their builds in real time, sharing cost breakdowns, posting construction videos, asking questions of experienced builders across the world, and receiving answers within hours from people who have solved the exact problem they are facing. The specific technical knowledge that once made Earthship building accessible only to the highly dedicated or the geographically lucky is now searchable and free. How to source free tires from local tire shops. How to pack a tire correctly and measure the compaction density. How to calculate the glazing to mass ratio for your specific climate and latitude. How to size a cistern for your local rainfall pattern. How to design a gray water botanical cell for your household's gray water volume. How to wire an off-grid solar system and configure a charge controller. Every one of these pieces of knowledge is now documented, discussed, corrected, and refined in publicly accessible online communities. This knowledge democratization has a compounding effect. Every builder who documents their process contributes to the knowledge base that makes the next builder more confident, better prepared, and less likely to make the mistakes that cost earlier generations of builders time and money. The learning curve that once filtered out all but the most dedicated is now navigable by a much wider population of motivated households. That is Force 4. Force 5. The regulatory landscape is actually improving. The fifth force is the one that most people who follow the Earthship space do not fully appreciate because the progress is slow, unevenly distributed, and rarely makes headlines. The regulatory environment for alternative and Earthship-style construction is genuinely improving in 2026, and that improvement is opening doors for builders who would have faced impossible bureaucratic barriers even 5 years ago. New Mexico has had specific permitting pathways for Earthship construction for years and continues to refine them. Several rural counties in Colorado, Arizona, and West Texas have developed more accommodating frameworks for alternative construction as the population of people seeking to build this way has grown large enough to create political pressure for accommodation. In Europe, France, Spain, the Netherlands, and Portugal have all seen regulatory updates in the past several years that create legal pathways for thermal mass and passive solar construction that were previously legally impossible or extremely difficult. The International Residential Code update cycle is ongoing, and sustainable building advocates have been increasingly effective at introducing performance-based language into code revisions. Performance-based codes evaluate whether a building achieves specific safety and performance outcomes rather than prescribing exactly which materials and methods must be used. As more performance-based language enters model codes, the pathway for Earthship and Earthship-adjacent construction becomes clearer even in jurisdictions that have no specific Earthship permit history. Additionally, the advocacy ecosystem around alternative building has matured significantly. Organizations like the Owner Builder Network, the Natural Building Network, and state-level sustainable building coalitions are actively engaging the regulatory process in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. When a builder in a challenging regulatory environment connects with these organizations before engaging their county building department, they have access to precedents, professional contacts, and advocacy support that simply did not exist a decade ago. That is Force 5. Why 2026 is the inflection point. Here is the element that ties all 5 forces together and that I believe makes 2026 specifically the inflection point for the Earthship revival rather than just another year in a slow trend. The 5 forces I have described are not operating sequentially. They are operating simultaneously, and they are reinforcing each other. The housing affordability crisis is driving more people to research alternative options. That research leads them to the online knowledge infrastructure that now makes Earthship building accessible. The solar technology price decline makes the system economically viable for the households who discover it. The regulatory improvements make it legally buildable in more places. And the energy cost trajectory makes the long-term economics more compelling with every passing month. Each of these forces on its own would produce some level of increased interest in Earthship building. All 5 operating together at the same moment produces something different. It produces the conditions for a genuine mainstream shift in a specific demographic, not fringe enthusiasts but financially stressed, well-researched, economically rational households who are looking for a path that actually works. The honest limitations that have not disappeared. I want to be completely fair in this analysis, and that means acknowledging the real limitations that the 5 forces above have not resolved and that any prospective builder deserves to know about clearly. The physical labor demand of Earthship construction has not changed. Packing tires with compacted earth is hard physical work. A realistic owner-built Earthship requires hundreds to thousands of hours of demanding manual labor spread across 1 to 3 years. This is not a discouragement, but it is a genuine barrier for builders who lack the time, the physical capacity, or the community support to sustain that labor commitment. The climate dependency of passive solar thermal mass design has not changed. The Earthship performs exceptionally well in climates with good winter sunshine, cold winters, and significant day-to-night temperature swings. In consistently cloudy, cold, wet climates, the passive solar system needs supplemental heating during extended low solar periods. In hot, humid tropical climates, the thermal mass system requires fundamental design adaptation. The Earthship is not a universally transplantable design. The permitting environment, while improving, is still difficult in many jurisdictions. Urban and suburban builders face permitting challenges that rural alternative construction communities do not face. The Earthship revival is primarily a rural and semi-rural phenomenon, and builders who need to stay within urban or suburban contexts are not yet well served by the regulatory improvements described above. And the resale market for Earthships remains small and specialized. If you build an Earthship with a 5-year exit horizon, you face a limited buyer pool and potential difficulty with conventional mortgage financing for buyers. The Earthship is financially optimal for long-horizon occupants who plan to stay, not for short-horizon investors who plan to flip. The reason the revival is different this time. Here is the final point I promised you at the beginning. The reason I believe the 2026 Earthship revival is fundamentally different from the periodic waves of interest the movement has seen before is this: the economic conditions that are driving it are structural, not cyclical. Previous surges of Earthship interest were driven by cultural moments, by a documentary, by a charismatic figure, by a temporary spike in energy prices that later subsided. Those surges produced genuine builds and genuine communities, but they faded when the cultural moment passed or the energy price spike resolved. The conditions driving the 2026 revival are not cultural. They are structural. Housing affordability is a structural problem that will not resolve in 5 years. Energy price escalation is a structural trend that will not reverse. Solar technology affordability is a structural shift that will not go backward. The knowledge infrastructure is a structural change that cannot be undone. The households building Earthships in 2026 are not responding to a trend. They are responding to a permanent change in the economic landscape that has made the conventional path genuinely untenable for a growing segment of the population. And that is why this revival looks different from every previous one. The forces driving it are not going away. If this gave you a new way of looking at what is happening in alternative housing right now, please hit the like button because it helps this content reach more people who are making these decisions. Subscribe for more honest and current analysis of Earthship building and alternative housing economics in 2026. Drop a comment below and tell me which of the 5 forces resonates most strongly with your own situation, because I read every comment and respond personally. See you in the next one.